Hello, 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 everyone.
Hello.
My name is Shanti Das. I am the founder and executive director of Silence the Shame. I am so honored to be here today to moderate this most important conversation. And I would love for our esteemed panelists to introduce yourselves. Let's start with Crystal.
Hi, my name is Crystal. My pronouns are she, her, or you can refer to me as Crystal when talking about me. I am a corporate mindfulness and emotional well-being coach, and I work specifically with the Black and LGBTQIA plus community in increasing their awareness of value in corporate settings. I also do breath work and a sound therapist, among many other modalities, to really just bring about presence into more presence into the daily life, and I do that in private practice.
Thank you, Crystal. Next, let's start with Machel.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Machel Hunt. I'm a psychosexual therapist and relationship counselor. I specialize in relationships and sex in my private practice. I also do a lot of training around mental health and wellness, emotional well-being in different spaces, particularly in the workplace. And I also do lots of work around mental health within the Black community. I think it's such an important topic for us to actually engage in, not just from a clinical perspective, but also just from a personal perspective with each other. So that's me in a nutshell.
Absolutely. Thank you, Machel. And Holiday?
Good afternoon. My name is Holiday Simmons. Pronouns are he, him, and his. Thank you for having me to this very critical conversation. I run a private therapeutic and somatics coaching practice called Southern Soul Wellness, and I consider myself part of the healing justice movement, which is the intersection between social justice, racial justice, and healing and wellness. My practice is for one-on-one clients as well as group sessions, usually through frontline organizations that deal with racial justice, and want their staff or their fellows to get some healing as they're fighting and raging against the machine. And then I also help coordinate wellness spaces for conferences. So I work with teams of Reiki practitioners, massage therapists, acupuncture, acupressure, reflexology, and I consider myself running a decolonizing practice and a holistic practice. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, it is really a critical time for us to be having this conversation because so many people are hurting in our country and so many of our communities. And again, kudos to the intersection for allowing Silence to Shame to partner today on the ABCs of mental health. And July is formerly known as Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. Now, a lot of people in the mental health field are using the term BIPOC, which is more inclusive, and it stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So happy BIPOC month. The perfect time for us to be having this conversation. So I really love to jump right into this. And Crystal, I'll start with you first again. Why is mental health awareness specifically important for the BIPOC community?
It's really interesting. I work specifically with Black clients, and I have a few clients that are people of color, and I don't necessarily have Indigenous clients. However, well, we are. What I notice is the work of mental health awareness is coming from years of survival. Many of the things that many people in the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community, they've always been taught how to survive versus the awareness of what their mental health state is. And when their mental health state is in a particular place, what seems to be the best thing that is next for me. That is kind of where we are today. But growing up, most of anything that was going on in mental health was turned towards how can I create that. Parents, teachers, elders of the community are always teaching how to survive. And so there's not much attention on the awareness of what our mental health states are, and to allow those mental health states to drive what our next conditioning is, or our next, the next thing that we do. So now that we do so much around mental health awareness, I think people are coming into a high awareness of who they are and what can support them versus how can they just survive from moment to moment to moment. I think mental health awareness is really helpful to help Black and Indigenous people of color thrive.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So much of what we have experienced as a culture, has been generational, right? And passed down. And to see everyone kind of have this awakening, if you will, right, around mental health, understanding that it's something that we all have. We may not all have a mental illness, right? But we all have a mental health. And so I wanted to open up the next question to everyone. How do you approach your purpose of working with mental health advocacy? And we can start with you, Machel.
I think, Crystal made such an important point about, the beginnings of our mental health isn't just around us. It's around our communities, our families, our parents, our siblings. And I think for me, mental health advocacy have always been a part of a way of life for me, even before I became a psychologist. Sort of like looking out for the people around us, making sure. I remember when I was first started out as a psychologist, I was noticing all these statistics about people of color being more, having a higher percentage of diagnosis and being, institutionalized a lot more than others, whether they're white counterparts. And I just thought, what is this about? And I feel that a lot of our anxieties, our worries, our concerns, our social norms do lead to us having more issues around mental health and not necessarily having the space to discuss that or to explore that. And, most of us may remember growing up where, it was always, we don't talk about our dirty laundry in public. We'll just pray about it. We'll go to the church and it will be okay. Don't say that to anyone else. Keep that in the house. So our culture doesn't actually support mental health advocacy from a traditional standpoint. So I think this kind of new awakening now and being able to be in a position to support other Black people and people of color and Indigenous people really supports my idea of advocacy. And I take it with me every single place I go. For me, it's all in the way I interact with people. It's always, how do you feel and how do you want to express yourself today? And really kind of taking that into consideration and being mindful about where people are and not having judgments. As humans, we're naturally judgmental. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to be so mindful not to, and even as clinicians or therapists or CEOs or, business owners, we think that we've somehow, eluded that part of our humanity by, we're not doing that. But, it's just being aware of our unconscious biases and being able to kind of bring that mindfulness to each interaction, whether it's a client, a colleague, a friend, or a partner. So that's my kind of view on mental health advocacy.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you said, how do you feel today? Because it changes, right, from day to day,
exactly.
hour to hour, and especially
in this climate.
Right. And it's interesting. My father was of Indian descent. My mom's African American, but my dad took his own life when I was 7 months old. And mental health awareness, advocacy, it just wasn't something that we talked about as a family. And because I went through my own really serious depression and suicidal ideation, that's, why I chose mental health advocacy and the work that I do. And I absolutely love the work that I'm doing and all the communities that I get to work with now. But it is so important that we recognize our feelings, that we acknowledge them, and that we learn to process through them. Holiday, what are your thoughts on mental health advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate everything that's been said thus far. I think I would just add, I feel like as people of African descent, and I mean that across the diaspora, so whether you're from the continent or the Caribbean, or these United States, we have always had like some sort of spiritual base and spiritual advocacy by and large. And I feel like spirit and ritual and ceremony serves one purpose, but the mental health aspect it serves a different purpose. And so I'm appreciating all the panelists and the fact that there are so many Black folks that are in mental health these days, in the mental health field, and various, be it sort of psychiatrists and psychologists, to more of the woo world of, like I was saying, Reiki practitioners and whatnot, because I think they both serve a complementing need. So we need a space to fellowship with people and be in communion and to shout and to sing songs and to have a ritual. And that serves to connect us to each other, to connect us to our past, to connect us to something larger than ourselves, higher power, or spirit, what have you, a God. But then that ongoing daily dealing with the world, dealing with abuses in our home and abuses by the state, that requires a different type of support. And so I think that where we've seen an absence of folks like us being visible in the mental health world, we've been visible in other worlds. And I don't think that's entirely, I think a narrative is that we have been hesitant or reticent to be, to go see a therapist or to air our dirty laundry. But to our credit, the Western mental health world has also been very exploitive and abusive towards Black folks. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the intersections of Western mental health. So all of the psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, which is also my training. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that whole world and the medical industrial complex, Tuskegee trials, eugenics, and all of these, the fact that, the original diagnostic statistics manual that named drapetomania as a mental illness, which was the diagnosis for enslaved people who ran away from their captors, that was considered a mental illness.
Right.
Homosexuality was considered a mental illness. And this is the same guidebook that we use in our training to this day. So I think it's important that we complicate and question these structures that we haven't wanted to be in. I think it's more than just our shame. I think it's also that we are distrustful of folks in our position, and that we're gatekeepers for a lot of times. I know a lot of my clients have never consensually seen a mental health provider. They've come to me with a great deal of vulnerability, and so I think that the folks on this call today are really bridging that gap between spirituality and mental health, as well as renaming and reclaiming what mental health can look like for us.
Thank you so much. And I just learned so much even from what you were just sharing. It's really important that we look at the injustices, right, in the mental health field. So much has happened just in terms of how they shaped how we think about ourselves and the type of care, right, that we are to get in our communities. But we're certainly grateful for your work, Holiday, and everything that you do. And as an advocate and the founder of Silence or Shame, I look forward to working and collaborating more as we continue to change this narrative about how we heal within our communities and what the best practices are. Crystal, would you like to add anything to that?
With everything being said, I'm also seeing that people in leadership naming their identities is really, really important, because many of the people that you see from a day-to-day basis don't, as Holiday said, have a trust in anyone that has these letters behind their name. And so what I noticed is that naming myself, naming gender, naming, well, it's obviously that I'm Black, but naming those things gives people the brave space to be who they are, because by definition, many of our existences are named as a disorder. They're not necessarily, we're not talking about mental health. Yes. So I think advocating for your existence or your experience through this life as being something that is right rather than something is wrong is very, very important. And a reason why it was important for me to move from being in the system as a doctor to stepping out of it, which I think there's so much beauty in all of it, was because if I had the title and I really believed that I really knew that people were giving me their power only because of my title, which is very colonial in nature. And so to step away from it and be able to be with people without all of the boxes, that was the way that I could see advocating the most. Because many of the ways that I wanted to sit with Black people, many of the ways I wanted to sit with queer people were against what the laws would allow me to do, as if that was something wrong. I had to basically name them as a disease in order to sit with them versus creating practices around community and advocating just for mental health awareness in general. So I just wanted to add that naming and showing up as who we are is really important in creating that brave space for other people to begin to trust themselves in situations with people who are leading and doing this work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So now we're going to get into the quote unquote ABCs of this conversation. And so we're going to start with anxiety. What is anxiety and how does it relate to your practice within the Black community, Crystal?
Anxiety can be named in so many different ways, but I'll give the textbook definition. And it says a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And then the diagnosis is a nervous disorder characterized by a state of excessive uneasiness and apprehension, typically with compulsive behavior or panic attacks. And I see it so much. And although I can't name it as anxiety, just working in systems that aren't supportive, but that are taking care of, that are ways that you take care of your family, it just brings up so much. And I think many people are just living on anxiety 24 hours a day. And my previous work as a chiropractor, there was such a need to bring the system from sympathetic activity all the time, fight or flight, got to do, into parasympathetic, rest and digest, and just allow the body to chill. But it doesn't, a lot of people that I see in practice generally don't feel safe enough to chill, because if I chill, if I rest and I digest, then what's going to happen is basically the world going to come to an end, because I'm not able to take care of this. How am I going to take care of that? And so the question that I get a lot is, how can I manage anxiety? Because it's like, this is going to be part of my life, because this is how I have to survive and this is how I have to go. And that's why I think our conversation has to shift into recognizing our power within these systems and talking about liberation, talking about centering our joy, centering all of these things that are traditionally and right now unsafe for people to rest, and we just throw it out there, isn't the easiest thing. Many people don't feel safe enough to rest, so we have to create safety around rest to allow the body to begin to heal, which is how we move through anxiety. That's how I see it.
And even I think, conversations like we're having today, being able to create these safe places and spaces, right, for people to be able to open up and share. Holiday, I noticed you nodding your head a lot. Did you want to add anything to that?
Not really. I was just, I was in enthusiastic agreement. I mean, I think that anxiety is diagnosable, but it's also kind of just a thread of so many of our existences, and it shows up in so many ways. So it's almost like, the oxygen we breathe. To be of this world, I feel like it's almost guaranteed to have some sort of anxiety. So it is more about managing it, as Crystal said, than sort of trying to do away with it. Yeah, absolutely.
Machel, I have a question for you. From your perspective, are there any noticeable trends in regards to anxiety based on current events such as social unrest, across the country, the global pandemic of COVID-19, and the increased death toll of Black trans women?
Thank you so much for that question, Shanti. So I just want to kind of add to what my colleagues have said earlier. And I think as Black people living in the United States and other parts of the world, anxiety is sort of like a normal day-to-day that we experience. We live in a constant state of anxiety because there's so many things that's challenging to us, even in our unconscious, that we don't necessarily deal with consciously every day. There's this unconscious anxiety that we experience from walking, from existing in a way. So as far as the trends go, I feel like that's always been there. I think what I've noticed now is a heightened sense of the need to really kind of deal with and cope and endure the anxiety that is happening. I think we have so many triggers. You mentioned just 3 of them. COVID-19, that's triggering for almost every Black person I know, because somehow, somewhere, no matter where they are in the world, they're affected by it. A family member, a friend, a partner, a colleague. Seeing the news and seeing that, or not even on the news, just through social media, and seeing every day that another Black trans woman have died, another Black child have died, another Black man have been killed by the police. That is triggering to lots of us, and this is constantly on a day-to-day basis. So I think now what I'm seeing in my practice is just the need to actually deal with this, to talk about it, to express how you feel, to kind of raise the concern about your anxiety, which may have been there for a long time, but now these triggers are making it more visible. The feelings are much more tangible for people, and we're in a kind of collective space now where perhaps before, someone who had a bit more money, who lived in a nicer area, their anxiety didn't resonate as much as someone who was walking through a bad neighborhood and didn't have lots of money and so on. But now we have a collective experience, and that is something that's resonating with people. So there's a need now to really kind of focus on, well, how do we get through this, and how do we get through this together? So it's something I start my sessions with in my private practice is how are you feeling? How is the last day, the last week, the last hour on your way here affected you? And what's going on in your mind around that right now? I think as well, just this idea that, there is a social unrest coupled with a global pandemic, coupled with racial injustice. People tend to get into the space where they're now wondering, well, what do I deal with first? One thing that Crystal said, which was really important, and I do this in my practice as well, is centering that person and validating their existence, validating their feelings, validating their worries and their concerns and their anxiety, and saying, that you're not going to do it by just listening to me saying rest, or listening to people on social media saying all you have to do is exercise every day, or listening to a guru saying meditation is the key. No, it doesn't work. It's not that easy. So it's really kind of getting to appreciate that it's a process, and that process looks very different for everyone. And you have to do it in your own time, with your own tools, and on your own terms.
Thank you for saying that, Machel. It's interesting, even with all the work that I do and all that I've been educated on, and I speak to incredible professionals like yourselves on a regular basis. I have a tough time still. And just last night, I try not to let my mind wander too much, but, I started thinking about, and just, watching the news and seeing kind of this second wave. And I don't know if it's the first wave that's lingering, or if we're really in the second wave of COVID, but wondering, what the landscape looks like for the fall. I have a nephew that's going to be starting college. Is he going to be able to go? A niece that's in school, are they going to be safe? Am I going to be able to continue to make money with my foundation? And in my mind, it just got to be too much. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to turn on some music.
Right.
And I'm just going to escape for a minute. And I had to, then that was a way for me to, so to speak, recenter myself and to just, you know, allow myself to calm down before I was trying to go to sleep, because I didn't want to go to sleep having nightmares, you know, and
Right.
that anxiety transition into sleep mode. And so it really does depend on the individual, because there is just an influx of issues and problems that we're all dealing with on a daily basis. And then if you add in, you know, your spouse or your partner and children and your job and everything, it gets to be overwhelming. So that's why the work that, you know, you, Crystal and Holiday do is just so important to our communities. And again, I just can't thank you for being a part of this conversation today, and just for everything that you're doing is super important. So I'm just so grateful. Now I'd like to go to bipolar disorder, which is the B in our ABCs of mental health. So Holiday, can you share with us just generally what bipolar 1 and 2 are?
Yes, but I'm going to start with the caveat,
Okay.
which just doing a little topic shift. My caveat is that I too am intentionally, like Crystal mentioned, I'm intentionally not licensed because I need that separation from the state. I don't want to be a mandated reporter. I'm part of a network of practitioners around the country who try to support people in crisis, our various clients in crisis, without having to call the police, because we know often the police are more harmful than helpful in our communities. My clients are all LGBT, Black, mostly Black and Indigenous, but then also some other people of color. I'm Black Cherokee, so those are the communities I mostly work with, as well as men who are trying to transform their patriarchy. So for all those identities, calling 911 when someone is in crisis is often not helpful. So I say all that to say is not having the license, I don't make diagnoses. And I actually don't even ask people what diagnoses they've been given when they come to me. So I deal very little with, actual diagnoses. You know what I'm saying? Like I can pick up on things, and then I could once I have a relationship with someone, I can say, what have you been? Having said that, I have a number of clients who are living with multiple personality disorder, bipolar disorder, but every single one of them, including myself, has some level of PTSD. And I think that PTSD can be post-traumatic stress disorder. It can be, again, diagnosed, but it also can be one of those things like anxiety that so many of us are living because of living while Black, living while trans, et cetera. But bipolar in particular is, bipolar 1 is often demarcated by going up, higher energy levels, being more impulsive, more erratic, illusions of grandeur. And this is for all genders, but I definitely feel like I've read and have seen this more from male-assigned, male-identified people. And I think there is an intersection there with bipolar 1 and that upwards of up, and then a period of down, of depression, a depressive period afterwards. Bipolar 2 is also, and my colleagues who do make diagnoses can, co-sign or correct me if I'm wrong on any of these definitions. But it's hard. I think that it's hard to determine what's happening with someone if they exhibit any of the behaviors I said, and they're also LGBT. So I think someone going through a gender transition, let's just take a Black trans person, there are going to be days when you feel in your power and you feel really creative and you just got your life from watching Pose and you are up. And then days when your people are mispronouncing you and you have dysphoria. And I think for a practitioner, it's hard to determine, is this about chemical things happening with the brain, or is this a social-based response to a very limiting world and a very harmful world. So I just wanted to lead with that, and then I'll pause there. Yeah.
No, thank you for that, Holiday. And quite honestly, I never even, respectfully never considered how, sometimes it is a social issue, right? As opposed to a chemical issue, and the harm that it can do to your overall mental health and wellness. Crystal, can you elaborate more on that and how, this mental illness impacts the community from your lens, and even talking about the dynamic of chemical versus social?
Everything that Holiday said times 1,000. Even speaking to just the awareness of how someone is being. A lot of times the diagnosis is coming from, and I think we said it earlier, just someone's existence in this world. And so when I see people that are diagnosed, specifically Black and trans people that are diagnosed with bipolar, some of them, it feels like a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh my goodness, oh my gosh. What I've noticed is there's a desire to feel normal, or to like have a thing that can have someone feel normal who has been told that they are a disorder all of their lives. Mm-hmm. So we get the diagnosis and we're like, oh my goodness, here's a thing. And then also I also see in practice how many people don't, if they want, the awareness of their mental illness or mental stability hasn't ever been addressed. And so many of them are exhibiting physical and social symptoms. But you have to be strong as a Black person. You have to be strong as all of these things. So everything has been ignored for so long that asking for support in any way, whether it is through allopathic system or holistic, or are we looking completely in vitalistic, however we want to look at it, and whatever lens, many people that I specifically see don't even know how to ask for support, because they're going in between, am I wrong for my existence, just for who I am, and is this the punishment that I deserve? Mm-hmm. I get that a lot. Is this the punishment that I deserve? And so there's just so many different ways and avenues when we talk about accessibility, and then what we want accessibility to. And something that Holiday spoke of that I think is really, really important is having the support outside of the system, so people can be held as who they are and be seen and witnessed through their transition, whether that is whether that is like trans, or that's just transitioning into their power and recognition as a Black person, whatever it is, to be seen, held, felt, and witnessed as who you are, versus as someone who's problematic or someone that needs to be detained rather than listened to. I think that is so very important. And I advocate for more. I use the word training very lightly, because people don't need to be trained specifically in that way. But I do advocate for more people being able to shift their paradigm of how they look at humans, either as in order with white supremacy, or disorder, and they can't function. So that's what I have to say about how that shows up in the Black community.
Thank you. And I know we have about 15 minutes left, and I really would love to. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and I would love to come back and have a conversation around suicide in the LGBTQIA+ community, because just from everything that you said, I think it's so many layers there as it relates to mental health in the community, within that particular community. And it's so much education and knowledge that needs to happen with everyone else. And we want to find ways to be more supportive and inclusive. So I hope that maybe we can talk again and keep these conversations going. I did want to get to the C in the ABCs of mental health, which is communication. And communication is the key to any relationship. Machel, in your opinion, how has the pandemic and social unrest affected the ways that couples communicate?
That's a very interesting question. So my area of specialty at work is working with couples and relationships. And I think we say that so cavalierly all the time. It's like communication's key,
Right.
communication's key. You know, you can't have love without communication, but it's actually difficult to achieve. Um, it's very difficult because we learn to communicate so differently. And then when we come together in a relationship, you now have to merge those skills that you've learned individually with someone else and make sure that they match. So I think, you know, couples struggle with communication anyway. And it's something that they constantly have to work to achieve a high level of kind of expertise at. With the pandemic, it's made things far more difficult and complicated, because now you're not just talking about the day-to-day of your lives. You're talking about, well, what happens with the savings account? What happens with this, you know, are you going to go on to, you know, change your income support? Are you going to, you know, go out with your friends knowing that it's COVID and, you know, I don't want you to come back home and take you know, bring this virus to me and the kids. And, you know, there's so many other issues now that couples are having to deal with. Finances, children being at home, schools, you know, and all of those things. And then also this element of sex and intimacy. You know, perhaps this couple have gone for 6 years with having sex once a week because that's the only time they have. And now they're at home together. They don't necessarily know what to do around that intimacy. Do we really want to increase our intimacy? I was fine with just having it once a week, you know. so you know, now that becomes a conversation, and couples are still struggling on how to deal with that. What do I say? Now we're realizing that, you know, we have different libidos. You know, my sex drive's not as high as yours, and now you're realizing that because you're seeing each other every day. That becomes another discussion. Couples don't always have the tools to have those discussions. So I think communication has strained a lot for couples. But I do think also, on the other hand of that, couples are beginning, because they have to kind of work through this if they want to stay together and have a healthy relationship, they're beginning to kind of incorporate tools of communication that can help them. So I think it's served, the pandemic has literally served lots of kind of, you know, negative ways, you know, particularly with as many people who passed away. But it's also given people, couples, individuals, a real time to reflect and to be conscientious and to think and feel and communicate a lot more. So I think I hope it stays that way. I hope people continue to learn how to communicate with each other, how to build strong values in communication, not just saying communication matters, but actually, you know, putting that into practice and learning how to maintain that healthy relationship, because you're absolutely right. Without communication, without good, honest, open communication, it's very hard to maintain a healthy relationship.
Absolutely. All great points. Thank you. I have one other question for you, Machel. How can we be more inclusive of the various experiences of the Black, queer, and trans experience that may not be as accessible?
I think it's again, it's something that people are learning to do. For a long time, we haven't actually had much resources available for gay experiences or queer experiences or trans experiences. And I think within the last 5 years, those resources have become more available, but people are still trying to get used to this idea, even with this idea of pronouns. You know, even among the gay community, among the trans community, and the wider LGBTQI community, it's still a struggle for people to get pronouns right.
Can you explain that a little bit more, even just for my own edification? I would love just, you know, explain the importance and why it is extremely important to be respectful of one's pronouns.
Right. Well, I think it goes back to something that was said earlier about identity. And I think a lot of gay people and people of color and people within the LGBTQ spectrum have struggled mostly because their identity isn't validated by anyone else.
Gotcha.
And I think part of validating that identity is saying, this is how I want to be seen, and this is how I want to be respected, and this is how I want to be addressed. So that's the biggest value in getting someone's pronouns right. It's saying, I'm validating you as you're presenting yourself to me, not as I perceive you, but as you're presenting. And I think the perception is what causes the issues that we have, because you see someone who looks or sounds or acts a certain way, and you automatically ascribe your idea of who that person is to them. And therefore that's where the pronoun goes along with that. So I think we always have to keep checking in with ourselves and our identities and saying, well, how is this person wanting to be identified? Because our failure to do that is what continues to perpetuate this idea that someone isn't valued by their friends, by their relatives, by their clinician, by their support worker. Those kinds of things are really important. And I think just in terms of the resources that are available, we have to keep seeking out new resources, not just seeking out, but also building. We, as the people in this group, we have so much strength and so much resources available. We should make that available so people can have that. And that's how we build up a consensus of how we're going to communicate with each other, and also expand the platform for how we accept and how we engage people who are LGBTQIA.
Thank you. Crystal, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just here for everything that was being said, especially as someone who identifies as a non-binary femme and perceived in one way. It's really important when you asked about that pronoun to be seen, not just how I want to be seen, but seen how I am, and to recognize that this is who I am. And I think what's powerful, in even on the other side of looking and seeing someone's pronoun, is to start to decolonize the mind on this idea of gender, the idea of how someone should perform. I think it's an activity that works with, this is how the person is, but then also, what is my resistance to that? And then always letting yourself go into, how has this social construct really offered harm to other people? Because I see you and I'm automatically thinking that this is your pronoun. I see you, but I don't know what your name is, so I would ask your name. That would mean me calling everybody Shanti. Like that makes sense, because that's not what your name is, and that's not who you are. And I long for the day where pronouns are recognized. I long for the day where pronouns are recognized as important as names are, and that this idea of pronouns really understands, or that really highlights the idea that even though I present as this way today, or this is who I am today, that can change and that can be very fluid. And so it's a question you should ask me all the time, not just something so that you can identify me right now. I just wanted to bring this aliveness to how we view people based on like logic versus the embodied experience.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Next, I'd like to go to Holiday. What needs to happen to push communication forward in the Black community at large and other sub-communities?
Yeah, that's a big question. And the answers could be exhaustive. I think there's so many options for expanding communication. I'll start with the micro and kind of build out to the macro. I think mindfulness and awareness of what one's own self is feeling on a sensation level, what one's body is doing on an emotional level, what they're feeling, and that first relationship with self, and being honest with where we are, and also trying not to be judgmental. So a centering practice that we do in somatics, and somatics is a healing modality that I practice that the root word is soma. So soma in Latin means of the body as perceived from within. So it's a modality that is part psychotherapy, part movement theory, and part body work. So all of that is part of the practice. And it starts off with just like that very first thing we learn in our reptilian brain of sensation. Newborn babies, all they know is they're full, they're hungry, they need to be changed. And then as the child grows, and then we get to our emotional self. So I think communication first starts with like being knowledgeable, aware, and to some extent just accepting where we are each moment. So checking in with ourselves. Secondly, then that communication with one other person, that looks like going with grace and curiosity versus judgment and shame and blame. And it goes hand in hand with knowledge of where oneself is. And the more that is a practice, the more you can see, this person is kind of talking to me rude, but it's likely because they're having their own trauma response. It's likely because, they're experiencing anxiety. So the communication is, maybe it's violent communication, or maybe it's sticky in some way, but to know the root of that is super helpful in communication. And then when you keep spreading that out more wide into a larger macro sense, I think reclaiming language is really important. I really appreciate you for not saying minority and saying that we're now saying BIPOC. I think that's super important, not only because very soon we won't actually be the minority in this country. People of color will outnumber white people. But secondly, there's a value, it's a value-laden term, the term minority. And then we double jeopardize ourselves by sometimes saying the term, it's a majority minority school. What the heck? Can we just say it's a school of predominantly people of color? So I think that's just one example of many of language shifts. I think that the conversation about pronouns is another example of language shifting. I think the pronouns they and them are much more common now than every year. They, them pronouns and other pronouns become more common, have more of a social capital where we can actually just use them and people know what we're talking about. I think even using the term Black versus, I'm not here to critique African American, but I think the term Black unites us across the diaspora, especially because in this country we do have so many Black immigrants, and then those of us from the U.S. South as well. So those are just some examples of communication. It's both it's personal, it's interpersonal, it's systemic, and the last thing I'll just end with visibility as a form of communication. So having conversations like this, having some celebrities talk about their own mental health struggles and battles, and just having that visibility and representation goes a long way. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Holiday. So I'm sad that our time is coming to an end. I think we have shared so much incredible information that is going to be a tremendous asset for the Black community. And I look forward to, getting this information out as well with Silence to Shame. I look forward to future collaborations with everyone on the panel today. And I would love for you all to just kind of give us some resources around some of the, specific topics that we shared today, or specific resources for the LGBTQIA+ community. I know for one, the Trevor Project does a lot around mental health in this space, and anyone else feel free to share any additional resources and let our viewers and listeners know how we can connect with you all.
So I'll go first. I think it's really important, this conversation and this platform we have. So I really appreciate being a part of it. I have lots of resources on my website, which is www.sextherapyforyou.com. And then I'm also on Instagram as relationship and sex doc, and on Facebook as Therapy for You. And again, I'll be happy to answer any question directly if you'd like to contact me and point you in specific direction for any needs you might have.
Thank you, Machel. Holiday?
Sure. I want to lift up the resources of Black Emotional and Mental Health, BEAM, a very beloved organization that I am on contract with. So you can just look up beam.org. The National Queer and Trans of Color Network. So it's both a network to find a therapist, but also there's a ton of resources there. That's NQT, National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. You can Google that. I want to also lift up Transvisible, also a super vibrant source of resources and webinars on their site. And I can be found at holidaysimmons.com and Instagram at thiswaytoliberation.
Thank you. So you can reach my organization at www.silencetheshame.com, and we do have a resource tab on the website. You can follow us on Instagram at Silence the Shame and on Facebook and Twitter at SilenceTHShame. I also want to give a great resource for the Crisis Text Line organization. It is a free resource where you can text and be immediately connected to a crisis counselor. So if it's 3 in the morning and you can't get to, you know, your therapist or your clinician or your social worker, you can text the word silence to 741-741. It's not in place of therapy, but it's just to help kind of walk you through the process of whatever you're going through at the moment, or kind of de-escalate a crisis. So that's a really great resource. And the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK.
Thank you.